Next up, I have Dr. Hratch Tchilingirian. He is a sociologist, an author, and also the director of the Spiritual Innovation Institution, the director of Institution Innovation at the Western Diocese. And what he is going to present is a path to knowledge and spiritual perfectionism in the Armenian philosophical way of thinking. Everyone, a round of applause for our next guest.
Thank you. My presentation, I think, is going to complement many of the thoughts that were presented here, especially for the Mesros, because I'm also going to start by asking, what is the truth? And I ask this to AI. So I want first to start by presenting to you what did they answer. So starting with Copilot, which is Microsoft AI tool, says truth. What is the truth? Perhaps truth isn't a single entity we can grasp entirely, but a mosaic of fragments that shape our understanding of reality. And what do you think? Asking me. Where does your search for truth take you? Now, I ask, what is the truth to ChatGPT? And this is the answer. That's a big question. Are you asking in a philosophical, scientific, or personal sense? Truth can be absolute or relative, depending on how you approach it. Some see it as an objective reality, while others believe it's shaped by perception and experience. What's making you think about this? Then I ask Claude, truth is a concept that has fascinated philosophers, scientists, and thinkers throughout human history. At its core, truth refers to statements, beliefs, or propositions that accurately reflect reality or correspond to facts. So here are three answers. And then I asked Gemini, which is Google's AI, can AI understand the truth? Because it seems to me that it doesn't. So I said, no. Current AI models, including large language models, don't understand truth in the human sense. They generate outputs based on statistical patterns and data, potentially perpetuating biases and inaccuracies rather than genuine comprehension. So there we go. One thing that AI can't do, at least so far, is AI doesn't know what is the truth. So, with that background, I want to start with the Armenian word panaganutun, which is used for artificial intelligence. Arhestagan panaganutun. Artificial intelligence is arhestagan panaganutun. Because I think it captures some of the philosophical and theological meaning and that are relevant to our discussion. So panaganutun, the root of this word is pan, logos, word, panmase, right? Panmase. So chosk, pan. In Armenian, panaganutun also means reason. And when I looked at a dictionary of Armenian language from 1910, the definition says that panaganutun is martgutun, chelk, mitk, humanity, mind, thought. That's what panaganutun is. And then in Armenian, we have panavor eyag, right? Again, panavor means human beings, those beings that have word, those beings who speak. And then we have anpan, which are the animals, right? And a lot of times when parents get, or someone gets angry in Armenia, they say, anpan anasunes, right? So what does it mean? Wordless Yev anasun, which we use for animals, right? It means an asun, asel, mega, a being that cannot speak. So that's what anasun is. It's not an insult. It means animals or creatures who cannot speak. So we double it up. Anpan anasun. So, but what's important for us is that when we talk about intelligence, when we talk about Kanaganutyun, the very idea of the word is very important, because we as human beings, we discover, we understand the world that we live in through words. And I want to give some passages from the Bible which underlines the importance of the word, the spoken word. In Genesis, as we all know, when we read the story of the creation, it says, God said, let there be light. God spoke. He used the word. He said, let there be light. And all of creation, everything happened through God's words when He created something. And then we read in chapter 2 that God formed every wild animal and all the birds in the sky and brought them to Adam to see what he would name them, and whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. So Adam identified or gave a name to each person, each animal, creature, everything that God created. Adam named them, and God said, accepted whatever Adam named them. And in parentheses, I want to also mention that during baptism, we give a name to the infant, right? Until that point, until we name the child is referred to as the baby or the infant, or in the hospital, they put a little tag on their wrist, tiny wrist, with the mother's name, right? They would say it's Hasmik's baby, boy or girl, because it doesn't have a name. So when we are baptized, we are given a name. So we become a unique person by receiving that name. We acknowledge when we give a name to a person who's being baptized, they become a unique person in God's, becoming God's child through the baptism in the church. So this use of the word pan and the naming is very important. And then fast forward in the New Testament, the most important passage in the Gospels, in the Gospel of John, first it opens the chapter with this, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. And the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. And we have seen His glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So the Word, as we see, the Word of God at the creation, and Christ as Pannas Lujo, the Word of God, He was present eternally with God. So becomes flesh, takes body like us, and comes into this world. Now I want to quote this from philosophy professor and theologian Hagop Nersoyan. Many of you might have read his work, a brilliant scholar of in our church. He says, and the Word became flesh, in John that I just read, is the foundational sentence on which all of Christianity stands. That is, the fact that the Word of God took body and became incarnate is the most important aspect of Christianity. And it has been debated ever since in theological discourse throughout the Church's history, trying to understand, as Nersoyan says, what is become? What is become? The word become. How are we to understand become in this context? So that the word became flesh, human, took body. And this is, in a nutshell, a mystery that we cannot understand with words, but through wordlessness, without words, but through the soul, through our soul that has been instilled in us. I will come back to this, but just keep this idea in mind. Now, in Armenian, I want to highlight in my presentation, sort of bring some of the thinking in Armenian philosophy and theological discourse about the idea of panaganutun, or intelligence, which is also in Armenian, as I said, panaganutun means reason as well. So in Armenian philosophy, reason is a central concept that expresses human cognitive and intellectual abilities. And this is, by the way, across all, if we go back to Greek philosophers, which have an influence on Armenian and all other philosophers. So this is not uniquely Armenian, but what's important that our own, in our history, that Armenian philosophers and theologians have thought through these ideas and concepts in Armenian and for the Armenian society of their own times. So this idea of reason, panaganutun, is associated with logic, thinking, and wisdom. I think this is another, the second point, that AI cannot have wisdom. It could have logic, it could think, because we tell it to think by teaching or algorithms, but it cannot have wisdom. This is something that's uniquely human. Imastutun, wisdom. And Armenian philosophers, who most of them were theologians, of course, thought of human intellect, wisdom, and the mind's role in understanding God and the universe. So their primary explanation is that human intellect and wisdom and the mind's role is to understand God and what He created. This is the primary purpose of intellect. And they thought of these themes, obviously rooted in the Christian theological thinking in their times and until our time, as well as I mentioned, through the classical philosophies such as Neoplatonism and Aristotelianism that were influential in Roman and Byzantine discourse. And here I'd like to highlight the thinking of three Armenian philosophers, among others, but these are some of the, I think, philosophers who address the idea of intelligence. So the first is David the Invisible, David Anhaft, from 5th to 6th century. He was a lay philosopher whose work intersected with church thought, and his well-known work called Sahmank Imastasirutyam, Definitions of philosophy, explores intelligence as the human capacity to perceive and comprehend the world through the senses and the mind. And here, the third point that AI doesn't have is the senses, which is very important. We use our senses to know the world and communicate with the world. David Anhak saw the intellect as a tool for discerning truth, as Father Mesrop mentioned. Discernment is very important. And human beings are made in God's image, as we read in Genesis, with rationality as a divine gift. So the intellect, the rationality, as it has been underlined by pretty much all the speakers or implied, is that it's a divine gift. It's not an algorithm, it's not some kind of a programming that you type and you have rationality, you have wisdom. And again, the emphasis is on a person's 5 senses and reason to make it possible to observe and understand all of nature. The second philosopher is well-known Anania Shiragati from the 7th century. Though he was a polymath, not a church theologian or church father, but his work reflects a blend of philosophical and Christian thought in medieval Armenia. Mind you that we could say that until the 18th, 19th century, everything revolved around religion, faith, and church. It's much more during modernity that religion takes a back seat, as it were, and you have, modern secularism or secularization taking place. But throughout history, faith, religion, the church were dominant presence in society and in intellectual discourse. In his Ashkaratsuyt, in other words, he treats intelligence as the capacity for rational inquiry into nature, again, as we said already several times, seeing it as a way to marvel at God's creation, that God created an ordered universe knowable through intellect. So in a way, the programmer is God, who created this world perfectly, the way it's made, its functions, the way nature takes care of its own, humans, we live. So in a way, it's a perfect coding, perfect programming, rather than something that the machine cannot do on its own unless, as other speakers said, unless it's programmed by human intellect. The third well-known theologian and philosopher is Krikor Datevati from the 14th to 15th century, who is a saint and a prominent dogmatic theologian in the Armenian Church. In his works, such as Kirk Hartzman's Book of Questions, he emphasizes wisdom again, the idea of wisdom, which is connected to intelligence, as a virtue stemming from God. So the human wisdom, again, is something that comes from God. It's a gift put in human soul. And he uses, drawing on Proverbs, where we read, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, as Father Mesrov also made this point in another, looking at it from another discernment point of view. So he distinguishes between worldly cleverness and spiritual understanding, prioritizing the latter as the path to salvation. So the path to salvation is not our human being smart and intelligent as such, but to spiritually understand that which God has instilled in us, which is the path to union with God, the theosis that will come, and the path to salvation. So in this sense, intelligence is not an end in itself, but a means to approach God's mysteries. And mysteries here in the church's, again, theological understanding, is not some kind of a secret or mystery that perhaps capital M, which means something that cannot be explained humanly, something that is so beyond our comprehension that it's a mystery. Chorhut, chorhut, chorin. You know, the Badarak starts with the word chorhut, chorin, deep mystery. Chorhut, chorin. We cannot know God's nature as human beings because He created us all, but He reveals Himself, and we know Him through His attributes, that He's a Father, He's a Creator, and so on. But we cannot comprehend God's nature. So that's a mystery. It's not, mystery when they use mystery for films or others. Mystery hunt. It's not like that. But it's chorhut chorin. That's why we say we have to approach it with awe. Yergu hazutyam. We are constantly reminded in the church, right? Yergu hazutyam levaruk. Because it's such chorhut. And here I want to quote from Dattevati, where he talks about theology, that it is known that although all knowledge comes from God, either directly or through an intermediary, theology comes exclusively from God, that is, through creative revelation or inspiration. For our theology concerns that which natural reason cannot reach. Again, it emphasizes this idea that it's not something simply that you guys say, oh, I understand God, or what is this whole creation is all about, and so on. When we are in the body, just as the degrees of our faith and the mysteries of the church. So it's the intellect is not enough to understand all of creation that God, the creator with capital C, has made for us and put us in it. So it's incomprehensible in one sense that intellect cannot intelligence. So this is another fourth point, that AI cannot comprehend the truth as we started this presentation. What is the truth? What is the truth? At least based on our faith, the teaching of the church, the truth is through Christ is God, is the ultimate truth. Now, in conclusion, intelligence is human, purposeful, and divinely oriented, less about raw problem solving and more about understanding creation and the Creator. And when Gregory spoke about being creator, we are also helpers of the Creator, right? When God created us through our mother or through our parents, so the parents are the co-creators, as it were, with God. So the artists, also the creators, they have the master creator, as it were, and we're taking part in that process. So as such, intelligence cannot be artificial, and this is the fifth point that I want to make. When we talk about artificial intelligence, it's almost a contradiction. That intelligence, as I explained in the Armenian theological, from the Christian point of view, cannot be artificial. Հանագանությունը արհեստական չի գտնվում. So artificial intelligence in that sense cannot replicate the soul, and I think this is very important to underline. What's missing in artificial intelligence, and probably it will never happen, that artificial intelligence cannot have soul, a soul, like we have each one of us. What makes us unique as human, as persons, is the soul. We share similar bodies, similar makeup, but what is different that makes us each different? Billions of people. There are no humans that are the same. There are different persons. And what makes that is the soul which God breathes in us according to our faith when we are born. And at the end of our life, as we read in the funeral service, in the prayers that takes place at the cemetery, it says that when we die physically, an angel takes our soul, picks up the soul, and lifts it to heaven. It's in the prayers, beautifully said. So the physical body is buried, it's going to turn into earth. And again, the expression is again very beautiful. It says that as one is buried, it says, we were born of soil, we go into the womb of the earth to be born again into God's eternity. And the soul is picked up by an angel because the soul is eternal. It has been put in us by God, by the breath, by the Holy Spirit. So it cannot die and will not die, the soul. That's why when we go to church, everything revolves around take care of your soul. This is the spiritual nourishment that you need. The spirit, your soul that you need to take care of. Because this is what has been put in you by God, given to you as a gift. And this is that's gonna join God eternally after this life. So, as AI gets into our lives almost on a daily basis, right, deeper and deeper in society and into our lives through our phones or use and so on. In the process, again, I want to acknowledge, don't think that I don't appreciate, or there are a lot of positives and usefulness, so we're not underestimating that. But it's a sort of awareness. What we're talking about is to be aware, not to be taken up by this and lost. Because there is an element that AI, as it seeps deeper into our lives, I think it also eliminates the individual differentiation that I mentioned. What makes us different individually is also eliminated, because there is one way of whatever is fed into the AI, it has a one way of thinking or processing that information. Regardless, there is no regard for individuality. So whatever you ask, it's going to give you a general idea which is not directly related to you as who you are as a human being, as a person, whatever you are, it's going to say, oh, this is what human beings say or do, and so on and so forth. It's very general. So this is the sixth point that I want to make, that AI doesn't preserve a sense of our uniqueness as persons. And finally, God, as I mentioned, from his eternity has instilled in each of us that unique soul, so that we return to God through Christ at the end of our spiritual journey in this world, and towards what is in theology known as theosis. Theosis, to become one, to be God, theosis. But I'm going to end it by saying, along the way, we must be watchful of the dangers of kenosis, the emptying of oneself into this world, which means we have to be careful of the spiritual alienation from God. Thank you. If there are any comments or questions, yes.
Thank you. It was a really beautiful talk. I wanted to get your opinion when you said that through our knowledge, through acquiring knowledge and eventually acquiring wisdom that God gives us, we approach God's mysteries. How do you view this approach? Because the questions that are mysteries for us are so fundamental, they're never going to disappear, such as creation of the world and certain like fundamental mysteries of science that never go away. So how do you view us approaching these questions? Is it always that we get closer, but there's still an infinite amount to go to answer them, or?
You know, yeah. The question is, how do we approach God's mystery through intellect? Correct? If I understand. Yeah. I think in patristic literature, whether especially in Orthodox, the traditional or Catholic Orthodox and so on, Armenian Orthodox theological thinking, there is this idea that if we try to understand God, we have to be silent. So you can only, in a way, I'm sort of paraphrasing, I'm not quoting, but trying to, we can only understand God in our wordlessness rather than through our words. So, in a sense, prayer is that moment, right, where you try to go deep into your soul or in yourself and try to discover or understand or communicate with God in that silence that, again, we heard earlier, that this idea of communicating within ourselves and understanding. So in theology there is, I don't want to go into the technicalities, but there are terms, negative terms, that we describe as God is not this and that, and there are positive, God is this and that. So this is, again, the Church's way of trying to help us as the faithful, as members, baptized members of it, try to understand this mystery. But words are not adequate, as it were, or intellect alone. That's why a lot of people say, there is no proof. How can you prove that God exists and so on? But there are a lot of things that are related to our soul, like love and wisdom and, a lot of things, courage. You cannot put under microscope. How can you, this is one of the answers I get. So can you put love under the microscope and say what it is. You cannot. So these are the things, the mystical, but not in a kind of conventional sense mystical, but they're so powerful beyond us that we feel, that we communicate, we understand, but not only through intellect and words. Senses also, and this perhaps connects to the idea of the liturgy, liturgia, which means common work. When we come together for Badarag or for the services, all our senses are engaged. And that's where you feel the presence of God, through the senses that Armenian theologians have talking about. AI cannot do that. AI cannot give you a sense of the smell and the touch and the feelings and so on.
I just want to make a reference to when you mentioned God gives humanity his soul to be able to co-create with God, right? You mentioned something like that. AI is not a creator. AI can do a lot of things, but creativity comes from human. And creativity, the word creativity comes from create.
Yeah.
So humanity can create, but AI can execute. So that's basically what I'm trying to say is AI will never be able to have the soul, as you mentioned, that God is, because it does not create. It can execute. Humanity gets the soul, which has the advantage of being able to co-create.
Yeah.
That's basically a comment.
Yeah. I think it was a comment, but let me just summarize it. In the sense that AI is part of the creativeness of humans, which comes, this creative aspect, as a gift from God. So that human beings are able to create different things, including the computer and the algorithms and so on, rather than the AI or the computer doesn't have an essence of its own as it works. It's a machine after all, it's an algorithm. But I think we have to acknowledge, at least in my thinking, what is the danger that lies ahead in terms of as AI becomes more and more sophisticated and so on. It's the level of knowledge that it accumulates, which is beyond human capacity. And I'll give you an example. For instance, if you talk about a bottle of water, you might have read, 50 books about this bottle of water, how do they make it, and so on, and the details, as an expert. But AI has read 50,000 books about the same subject that you've read. You're an expert, you're a doctor, you've studied this in and out for years, and AI has 1,000 times more knowledge about your expertise. Why? Because you, humanly, we cannot read 50,000 books in 3 seconds. When AI is dipping into or going into, if you ask about something, that's why it's bringing all this knowledge and language that has been fed. And to me, this is one aspect that I haven't sorted out in terms of, in my own mind, what consequences this could have. And I think this is the mixed evil. This is one of the mixed evil, because you get excited about in one paragraph you don't have to read 5,000 books. You have the information in one paragraph. And it's exciting, and it says, oh, wow, it draws you in. But this could also have consequences. Quick.
Just a comment, a follow-up with that. If you consider AI as your research assistant, then you're in a good hand.
Mhm.
But if you make the AI your researcher, then you are going into the wrong path. AI can never be a researcher. It doesn't have the ability to think of what do I search for.
Mhm.
You are the researcher, AI, your research assistant. He has access to all the 50,000 books, but he doesn't know what to do with it unless you ask it the right question.
Yeah. I mean, I've read, this relates to another question that I've read about this a little bit, that the internet, nobody has control over the internet, the way it has come to be. You know, they have contributed to make it and so on, but now we are at a state where it has its life of its own, and nobody knows how it works. I mean, you can shut it, or, you know, there are countries who cut internet, but that's one thing. But in terms of the global presence of internet, it's beyond control. The question there, and then what come.
They have two questions on the chat. They've been waiting for a while.
Oh, okay. Do you want to wait? Sure. Okay, yeah.
So 2 questions from Vartan. The first question is, can the concept of AI be seen as a modern path to knowledge and spiritual perfection?
As it was said, it could be a source. For instance, you know, if you want to find out, to learn more about the Bible, let's say, about theology and so it could be a resource, because there's also knowledge acquisition in Christian faith. It's not just you sit at home and suddenly it's going to happen like a magic. You have to discover your faith as well. That's why the church, I'm sure many of us have been going to church all of our lives, there are still a lot of things that we don't know, and we still need to find out or learn. We have to make an effort. So in that sense, in the journey towards, in the salvific journey as it were, it could be useful, but it cannot, what's important is it cannot replace, it cannot sort of dethrone faith on its own. Because faith is uniquely human dimension.
His second question is, where do you see AI in 5 years when it comes to helping people grow spiritually and intellectually, like Armenian philosophy envisions?
Mm-hmm. I think what it could be useful, and I think we've not only think, but we've had some discussions about this. It would be, for instance, fantastic if we had the entire corpus of Armenian literature, you know, from 5th century until now, put in, you know, digitized, and have AI answer our questions. You know, what did such and such church fathers say about this, or what are the teachings on this and that? I mean, this is enormous work, obviously, because it's also in Armenian. So at the moment, AI, at least, it's not as smart in Armenian language as it is in English or in other languages. So I think there are benefits that AI could provide, but we have to remember it and treat it as a tool. It's a tool like a computer that you use to access things, to do things and accomplish things, but it's not an end in itself. to direct our lives. Here and then over there.
Since you spoke about orthodoxy, when he takes Saint Dionysius's celestial hierarchy and starts elaborating on it, he does as you get closer to God, they're intelligible, right? As you get they're intelligent. As you come lower, they're intelligible. And I think that's what essentially AI is, today's AI. They're intelligible, we understand it, it seems like it's making sense, but at its core, it's not intelligent. So if you remove the soul, if you remove the God component from it, there's no true intelligence, which is what you essentially said.
Yeah.
I think it almost felt like, as we were talking about Dr. Latsi, it's like when he wrote that, he knew you were going to talk about it.
Well, that's why it's classic. You know what makes something classic, in the good sense of the word, is that it's relevant. Yeah, timeless. It's timeless and it's relevant to us now. I think you bring a good point to mind, which is the fact that when what was the point my mind in a split second went, okay, I'll come back. I went to another.
Word classic.
Yeah. No, I think I was talking about, having this entire literature in AI. Yeah, now it came to me. So when people, as the Mr. mentioned, that they're using AI as a spiritual guide or as a virtual priest, right? What is the problem in that, as I mentioned? So if you ask about some spiritual issue, ask as if AI is your pastor. What it does is, it goes to whatever is in its mind, the LLM, the languages that are being fed. So it's dipping into, maybe Catholic and Protestant and lots of, like 500,000 books or materials on that issue, and it's saying that this is the thing. And this is the danger, because a lot of people say, oh, we are worshiping the same God. What's the difference? Whether we are Armenian Orthodox, or we are Protestant, or we are cornerstone, church, we're talking about the same Jesus. No, we're not talking about the same Jesus. We're not teaching. So it's very important that, and this is, I think, what the Mr. was referring to, when you go to an Armenian priest, he's gonna direct you, help you through the teachings of the Armenian Church. Not some random, generalization that you can just, follow. And this, of course, is related to that if we don't know enough about our church, then we might fall into a trap of, thinking that anyone who talks about Jesus Christ is okay. They're talking about the same thing. Some Bibles, it's written Bible, it says, Old and New Testament, but they're not, the content is not the same. The books are not the same. So if someone who knocks on your door and starts quoting the Bible, take that and say, give your own Bible to them, they would be lost. They wouldn't be able to talk to you. Yeah, one more.
So my question was, I think this is what I concluded from listening to you. Do you actually think that if we continue to use AI and we submerge into using AI, are we actually deviating from God and Christianity? Because I think you mentioned that in the conclusion, so I just want to make sure if that's...
If we're, as I said in my last point, if we're not careful, we could easily be drawn thinking that, oh, this is also providing me religion, faith, makes me feel good and whatever, if we're not aware of it. So, again, being in front of a computer screen or on a smartphone is not the same as worshiping in a church with a congregation, with a community of believers. And that's the big difference, where the sense is where the social aspect, the faith aspect grows through the community by being, Christianity is a very communal, ecclesia, yegereti in Armenian, means community. That's what it means. And in Armenian, yegereti, if we kind of play with the word, is yeg yeriti. Come and let it be. Yegereti. Okay? So, if you are churching with a computer, that's not a church. That's not, okay, it could be, I don't know, you call it whatever you want, religion or whatever, but it's not a church. Last question, the gentleman in the back.
So that's very much like what I was going to say. I think the conclusion I draw from your presentations is to a large degree, ignore media, because we're seeing that AI is rapidly becoming indistinguishable from human interactions. And that means it's going to pass the Turing test quickly, where we don't know truth from error. We don't have the discernment, we don't have the wisdom, according to what you all have presented. And so it seems exactly as you said, we need to be careful to put much greater emphasis on in-person interactions at worship.
Yeah. And that's the challenge, I think, for us. The more AI becomes mainstream and, again, takes over our lives, the more valuable, as it were, will become our spiritual status. Where are we spiritually? And to ask ourselves who we are and what we are, ultimately. That's the question. Let's end it on that.